You play for a group?
Yeah, we play all over the world, almost every day on internet TV. We have our own TV station. Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for
Here's
coming.
Devin.
I'm Devin Stewart Leslie. I'm with president of the Norman Studio Silent Film Museum. Anybody aware of our silent film history here in Jacksonville? A couple of hands. Well, I'll tell you guys more about that later on. But this film that you're about to see, The Flying Ace, it was inspired by Bessie Coleman. She was the first black female aviator. She had to go to France to get her license because America would not teach her. When she came back, of course, she was a superstar. She was doing air shows all over the world. And she had heard of Richard Norman, who was among the first to do what we called back then race films. And those were films that starred all African-American casts. She had seen one of his films called The Bulldogger, starring Bill Pickett. He was one of the first African-American rodeo stars. And she thought, if he's interested in that guy, he will definitely be interested in me. And she was right. She and her manager started writing to Richard Norman, and they were negotiating doing a film that would star her and would be based on her life. She came here to Jacksonville in April of 1926. Unfortunately, and we don't know if she and Mr. Norman had actually met yet, but we assume that they had planned to. Unfortunately, she was killed in an accident the day before the air show when they were rehearsing. Somehow or another, our understanding is that a wrench or something slid into a gearbox, but it caused the plane to flip. She was killed in that accident over at Paxson Airfield, which today is Paxson School. But Mr. Norman was still inspired, and so he wrote a film wrote The Flying Ace with two characters based on her, and I'm sure you'll guess which ones those are. One is the gentleman who is a black war pilot, which did not happen back in that day, and the other is the beautiful young heroine who is also learning to fly. We're told by some war historians that film, not only was it inspired by this amazing African-American aviation figure, but we're told that some of the young boys who were in the theaters, watching this film 100 years ago, also got inspired to fly, and they became some of the Tuskegee Airmen. So it's an amazing film, not only, and the people are always, surprised at how well it has withstood the test of time in terms of its production quality and the storyline and just the pure enjoyment. But it's also an incredibly important film to history, to film history, and to civil rights history. So we're really glad that we have this film. To our knowledge, it's the only one of Mr. Norman's feature-length films that still exists. We always hope that one day we'll find another. But if we never find another film, I'm really glad that this one still exists. Pay attention to some of the buildings that you'll see in this film. This was shot just over in Arlington and over in Mayport. But the buildings that you'll see with the train station are still standing, and that is what our nonprofit is working to do, to restore and eventually reopen those buildings, that whole complex, as a film learning, research, and tourism center. So I hope that we'll have your support in that. I would like to introduce Bernie Katzman, the amazing, world-renowned Bernie Katzman, and thank him for, we are live on Twitch TV today. If you've never heard Bernie play, some of you that just came in, you guys are in for a treat. I love telling the story. Bernie actually played at my wedding, and because between rain and a bad accident on 95 and a couple of other things, I was 45 minutes late to my own wedding. And the only reason that people didn't get up, get mad and get up and leave and take their gift with them is because they were enjoying a concert, an impromptu concert by Bernie. And I remember I remember one gentleman coming out, and he said, "Oh, you look beautiful. But that guy, your piano guy, he played Stairway to Heaven." And so he absolutely upstaged me yes, at my own wedding, and I am 100% okay with that because he is amazing. So without further ado, we'll let you guys see the film, and I'll chat with you guys later on. Again, thank you so much for coming out. Everyone enjoy that? A whole lot of respect to Ruth for being able to climb out of a burning plane up a rope ladder onto another moving plane. That took some real skill. We get asked a lot about that. There actually was only one plane, and this film was, it was billed as the most terrifying, airplane thriller ever. There was only one plane, and neither of them ever left the ground. He just, shot, whether it was the bad guy's plane or the good guy's plane, he just shot it from different angles, and that the part where, the plane supposedly turned upside down, he just flipped the camera upside down. And so, but it worked, for audiences back then, they were, this would never fly for reality today, but back then, there was a whole lot that they believed. In fact, certain actors, like for instance, Theda Bara, she always played a vampy, type woman. She was the home wrecker, and people thought back then that the character actually was the person. And so she would, be walking down the street, in New York, and women would, grab their children and, cross to the other side of the street because they thought that her on-camera persona was the person that she was. And that happened quite a bit. So, okay, so we had just a couple of people that knew a little bit about the film history here in Jacksonville. Yep. I'll give you the as quick as I can make it move. The industry in America really started in the New York, New Jersey, Chicago area, but they had trouble with shooting year-round because of the weather. Because in the cold months, it would cause a type of static, kind of a static look on the film. Sometimes it would freeze the film stock together, and two, the starlets just didn't want to be outside. So one year, a New York company called Calum decided, heck with it, we're going out and we're gonna film in the cold. Anyhow, we're not gonna let the weather, stop us and stop what we're doing. And so they went out and did a film. It was about Washington at Valley Forge, and it was like blizzard conditions, and crew members were getting frostbite, and it was just an absolute, terrifying experience. And so they said, okay, well, obviously this didn't work. We need to find us a place, that we can shoot more year round. So they put a scout on the train, sent them southward, ended up, just happened to end up get off the train at the Prime Osborne in Jacksonville. Now this was in 1907. Everybody remember, anybody know what happened in 1901? The Great Fire that just completely destroyed downtown. So this is only a few years after that. They get off, the scout gets off at what was at the time a state-of-the-art train station, the Prime Osborne. He comes out to this just beautiful, gleaming, ultra-modern downtown where we had some of the first, one of the first skyscrapers. It was a dial-up church building that's 8 floors? But that was pretty big back then. And so we had this beautiful, gleaming, ultra-modern downtown, but we also had the beaches and the countryside and the swampy areas that can double for the Nile, and we had pretty much everything except mountains, which, that's kind of the line that we still use today to lure films here. So we have such a varied landscape, so many different types of locales that can double. The St. John's has doubled for the Nile, it's doubled for the Mississippi. Downtown, areas of downtown have actually doubled for New York. So we had everything except mountains, and today you can green screen those in. And so we also, at that time, had Jed Bowden was the mayor, and he was very pro-film, and he would just bend over backwards to make sure that filmmakers got anything and everything that they needed, to come and film here. And so the Calum scout telegraphs back. He says, "I think we found our winter home." They come here, and in the very next year, in 1908, they put out a film as part of a Sunny South series, and it's called, I believe it's Love in the Everglades. Is that right? Something along those lines. Love in the Everglades. It's about a married couple. They're fighting. He kills her and drags her body into the swamp. This movie comes out, and immediately all of Florida is mad. The entire state is angry, at saying, why in the world would you portray us like this? This is not the way that we are. But the filmmakers up north were saying something completely different. They were looking at the scenery and saying, look at how beautiful that is. Look at those palm trees. Look at how the sun plays, with the scenes. They were just absolutely amazed. And they were saying, where in the world is this gem of a location? Well, that film, as awful as it was to Florida, was the genesis of the film industry coming here. And over that next little over a decade, Jacksonville was the epicenter for filmmaking in America, at least certainly during the winter months. In fact, it was called the winter film capital of the world. We had, and we had a lot of, at our height, we had about a little over 30 companies here. Now, some of them were small companies that didn't last very long. Some of them, though, were the beginnings of MGM, Paramount, and all the big players of the day came here. Theta Bara, Rudy Valentino, Oliver Hardy got his start here. He actually was working as a ticket taker in a theater in Georgia. Saw a one ad for someone to play a comedic role, and so he came here, and this was where he did his first films. Now, this was long before he connected with Stan Laurel. That didn't happen until he went to California for a while. But he did, I want to say, at least 100. A lot of them were short films, but he did quite a bit of filmmaking here. This was where he got his start. Now, there are several reasons why the industry left Jacksonville. It all comes down to three things. Comes down to LA getting water. LA really had started out as a kind of a desert area, and once they were able to get water in and be able to make the area inhabitable, they were looking for what was going to be, their main sustaining industry. And so they already were courting the film industry, pretty hard. The other was Thomas Edison. He was he owned the patents for a lot of the filmmaking equipment that was used back then. Now, he of course was a technical genius. Marketing, maybe not so much, because he did not think, from what we understand, he did not think that film was going to last. He thought it was going to be this flash in the pan, just kind of a novelty for a while that everybody would enjoy for a little while, and then they'd get tired of it, and we'd all go back to the stage theater, to live theater, which was where the real art was. He missed the mark on that, I think, but our understanding is that he was so convinced that film wasn't going to last that he refused to pay the $100 fee for patent for the international patent on some of his work, including a projector, which then the Lumiere brothers were able to work from and perfect that. But the reason that he plays into the industry leaving Jacksonville was because you couldn't email a guy a cease and desist back then. You had to go and physically protect your patents. And so he would send these thug types out to show up on a set and say, pay up or shut down. You're using Mr. Edison's equipment and you're not licensed. And so filmmakers were looking to get as far away from him as they could. And they were headed south, but they also were headed west. I mean, he was here, set up here on the East Coast, and the farthest you can get from the East Coast, obviously, is the edge of the West Coast, and that was where, as luck would have it, LA was already set up. They could go and just, plug right into a filmmaking infrastructure that was already set up, and an area that was already courting the industry hard. The third thing that drove, and this is what drove the industry from Jacksonville in particular, was, again, Jed Bowden was mayor a couple of times, and he was very pro-film. But there were some people in town that weren't too excited about, what the filmmakers were doing. They were doing things like shooting bar scenes on a Sunday, and that did not set well, with a lot of the more conservative folk around here. They also would do some kind of dangerous things. They would, run a car off the end of a bridge, and without getting all even back then, you had to have all the permits in place, and you had to have all the safety precautions in place. Well, if you were, an independent filmmaker, and you were working on not a huge budget, and you also had a deadline to get this film done, it was a whole lot easier to ask forgiveness than it was to ask permission and wait for a permit. And so they would set up these, set up a camera. For instance, there was a famous scene that where a barn burned down. They set up the cameras. They sent the production assistant kid to get the fire wagons, and he ran off. And so here came the fire wagons, and they put out the fire and everything. Everybody was safe. Nobody got hurt. But they already got that footage, and so they're not going to not use it. And so just things like that really didn't set well with some of the lawmakers and the conservative folk in town. And it all kind of came down to one scene that was shot over in Springfield, and that was a street fight scene, and the actors had their rubber sticks, and there was fake blood and all that. The way that we understand it was that scene, it was a fight scene, and it was in the streets, and so it attracted a lot of attention. And from what we understand, some just ne'er-do-well, punk kids came by, and decided to just join in. And so now there were real punches being thrown and real sticks being used, and it was real blood coming out. And so it just, and it destroyed one of the storefronts in Springfield. And so it really was kind of the I told you so of a gentleman named John W. Martin. He was running for mayor. He was running against Jed Bowden, and part of his whole platform was that he was going to clean up Jacksonville from the debauchery of the film industry. Well, he won, and that really was kind of the last nail in the coffin for the silent film industry here in Jacksonville. And everyone then, of course, moved west to Los Angeles, and there's arguments back and forth as to whether that was a good thing, or whether we really would, some people say, do we really want to be Hollywood, or are we really upset that that we didn't become Hollywood, because we did have that chance for a little while. So bringing it to today, there are buildings that you saw in this film. Again, those are still standing. They're over in Arlington, and that's something else that we get asked a lot. If you noticed, some of the title card said Arlington, Florida, and also Mayport, Florida. That was before those. At that time, they were their own little towns. In particular, Arlington, I guess Mayport still is, but Arlington was its own little town. This was before it was annexed into Jacksonville. But those buildings are still standing. And we, as a nonprofit, the Norman Studios, is working to fully restore and eventually reopen those buildings as a film museum, learning center, research center, and tourism center. We've been quietly at work for some years now. About 2 years ago, though, we got big news in that we were finally designated the National Historic Landmark. That is the granddaddy of historic landmark designations. That is as high as you can get. And so we are incredibly happy to to have that designation. There's 5 buildings total. The city owns 4 of them, and our nonprofit has a management contract to handle those 4 buildings. But there's a 5th building, and that is owned by Circle of Faith Ministries, and they have done a beautiful job at taking care of it, but now they are ready to sell it. They've outgrown it as their sanctuary, and they are ready to give it back to us. Well, not give it back to us, but sell it back to us. So that is the 2 big things that we have that we need help and support with, is to raise the money to fix up those 4 buildings, and also to purchase that 5th building. Now, we also just got some amazing news from the city. There was a CIP, that was Community Improvement Plan, that was voted on by City Council just a couple of weeks ago, and that earmarks $1 million for us to fix up the main building. So we'll be able to get climate control and bathrooms and all that, and really be able to shore up that main building. And then the next round of funding will go to fixing up the interiors and turning it into a museum that can be staffed all the time, where you guys can come and see us anytime you want, and you know, again, make this an interactive learning center that hopefully will bring in film fans from all over the country. Now, you can see the buildings now. They're by appointment only. Probably sometime in the next couple of months, we're looking at having open hours like every Saturday for a couple of hours. But if any of you are interested in seeing that, just email me at media@normanstudios.org, and we can set up a time for you guys to go see that. So that is my spiel. You know, any questions? Yes.
Was Peg an actor who worked in more than this one film today?
He is, you know, Peg is somebody that we want to do some research on. And by the way, we also need volunteers if anybody wants to come help us with events and research and that kind of thing. But what we do know about Peg was that he lived here in Jacksonville, and he worked in advertising. He also was a vaudeville performer. We don't know how he lost his leg, but we do know, because we have a copy of his early, you know, back then you had to register for service even if you didn't plan to go in. And by that time he had already lost it. But he worked in advertising and in vaudeville, and somehow he and Mr. Norman got to be good friends. And he was in all but one of Mr. Norman's films. But he's such an interesting character that we really want to find out, you know, all that we can about him, because one of the interesting things that we do know is that he traveled with Richard Norman to do films. I mean, back then it really was truly independent filmmaking, and you had to, you know, to promote your film theater by theater. And so he would go with Mr. Norman to all of these different towns, and, you know, just help kind of ballyhoo and promote the film at the theaters where they were going to be playing. Now remember though, this is in the early 1900s. You know, this is Jim Crow era. And so we've thought actually about maybe doing a film that really would kind of explore that relationship between these two gentlemen, because Mr. Norman was, you know, was a white gentleman, but he had a heart for race relations, and so he wanted to help. He set out to help give minorities a better place in mainstream film. But this was not accepted, you know, everywhere. And so we wonder about, you know, that car ride, you know, from Jacksonville to Des Moines or wherever he was, you know, going to show this film, and what they talked about and what the reaction was when they would roll up into town, you know, and when they went to go have dinner or, you know, or stay at a hotel. We know that Mr. Reynolds was not going to be allowed, you know, was not allowed to stay at some of the hotels and eat at some of the restaurants where, you know, where Mr. Norman would have been welcome. So that is a really interesting, because we know that they were close friends, and that's just something that we want to research deeper. But that pretty much is the extent that we know about Mr. Reynolds, was that he was living here. He lived here in Jacksonville. He worked in advertising, was a vaudevillian actor, and somehow or another got connected with Mr. Norman and was in all of his films.
He was really a good actor.
He really was.
He was real agile.
Exactly. I mean, it's got to be embarrassing to be the two guys to get chased down by the, you know, the one-legged guy, you know, and that multifunctional crutch. We believe that crutch is held, a lot of the Mr. Norman's correspondence and such was donated to the Lilly Library and the Black Film Center and Archive at Indiana University. And we're hoping to make a trip up there to look all through that archive, but we think that crutch still exists and is with the archive there.
Peg's cane?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the crutch. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping that still exists and is in, if not that archive, another one, because there has been. Mr. Norman passed away in '59, and his wife Gloria kept the property for a while. She ran a dance studio there for a long time, and that's, you know, a lot of people know, or, you know, they're emotional connection with that property is, is through dance. But in around 74, she decided to sell the property. They had Sotheby's come down and auction off a lot of Mr. Norman's stuff, which sounded, fine then because it was just Dad's crazy old stuff, and now the kids, are thinking, what in the world were we thinking? But the good thing about that, though, is that Sotheby's keeps copious records and they keep them forever. And so we're hoping to be able to, particularly with this $1 million appropriation from the CIP, to get the building fixed up and get it to where we can more safely collect artifacts. We're hoping to be able to work with them and maybe start trying to trace down, where some of the stuff ended up. So. Did you have a question, or?
No, I just reacted when you mentioned the dance studio.
Okay, were you one of Gloria's dancers?
I was about 60 years ago.
Oh, very cool. One of Gloria's dancers, yes?
What year was this film made?
This film was in 1926.
26. Did they use the Lumiere equipment or that?
I actually don't know a lot about, we don't know a lot about Mr. Norman's equipment, in part because of, so much of it was sold off. There are several generators. He's got, let me see, 2 or 3 generators, that are still there at the property, and those are like concreted into the floor. And we believe, Mosh actually has one of his cameras. Another one of his cameras is at the Autry Museum of Western Heritage in California. They've actually got quite a bit of his stuff, including some stuff that was used in, primarily in the 2 Westerns he did, the Bulldogger and the Crimson Skull. So that actually is not something that I know, but it's something that we, again, want to research. So if you know a lot about that stuff and would like to help us research some of those, let us know. We do know that a lot of, again, in his correspondence and a lot of his business papers, contracts and things like that, is at Indiana University. And so it could be that maybe there was a sales contract, for some of his equipment. We don't know, but that's something interesting that I'd like to look into. Thank you for bringing that up.
It's sort of a follow-up. Really, at some point or another, I do believe you mentioned this was one of the only copies left from that studio. Is that correct? Or that,
Yes,
are there additional films?
This is the only one that we know of that survives in its entirety. I always say that we know of because, films pop up every now and then. You find a Chaplin film in a garage in Cuba or something crazy like that. But to our knowledge, this is the only one of his full-length films that still exists. Now, I have got to imagine that somebody somewhere, and I'm thinking maybe even in Europe, has got to have a copy of The Bulldogger, because Bill Pickett, he was one of the first famous black rodeo cowboys, and he traveled with the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch and Wild West show, and Wild West shows back then were huge, and they traveled around the world. They traveled including to Europe, where Bill Pickett was considered the star. He's another interesting story to study because here throughout the States, he again he was African American and also part Cherokee, and he would travel and with the show, and he was as much a part of the cast as anybody, and yet he wasn't allowed to stay in some of the hotels that they were stayed at. He wasn't allowed to perform in some cities. In some cities, he was able to. He had to convince them that he wasn't black. He was just a very dark Cherokee before they would let him perform, and so he faced a lot of terrible mistreatment here in the States. But then when he went to Europe, he was the only one of the whole cast that they were interested in. We're talking about a cast of dozens of people, and he was the one that they were interested in. He was the one that was invited into the castles and the mansions and the best restaurants and all that. So his experience is an interesting study as well, and we're actually working on getting funding to do a documentary on his life, and then the fact that we believe Mr. Norman putting him in the Bulldog or in the Crimson Skull, we believe that that made him the first black, one of the first black cowboy stars, and also one of the first black stuntmen in the industry. But he doesn't get the credit for that. So yeah, again, Flying Ace is the only one that we know of. We hope one day that we'll find another though. Yes.
I was just wondering, and my compliments to the musician, thoroughly enjoyed.
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Based on
Thank you.
today, were there scores that came along with the films, or was that?
This was totally out of my head.
Yeah.
Totally out of your head?
Totally out of,
Great.
I
That
just,
was excellent.
Mhm.
that's, thank
Was it
God
like
I,
some musical scores that caused-
I'm able to see something and it just comes from my brain, through my fingers.
Back in the day, films would come not necessarily with full scores, but they would come with sheets that said, there's a funny moment at 5 minutes and 40 seconds, and at 10 minutes and 20 seconds there's a thrilling scene, and so they basically got sheets with clues as to kind of what was going on in each scene at each time, and so they would kind of be prepared. Okay, we play funny music here, or we play scary music here. So they came more so with those, and that's an interesting thing too about silent film is the the musicians were different, obviously at each theater, and so I've seen this film a dozen or so times, and I find myself sometimes noticing things that I didn't, on screen that I didn't notice, the first half a dozen times that I've seen it, and it all is because of the music that's going on. And so in some ways it's almost like seeing a totally different movie, each time when there's a different score. And now, 100 years later, silent film, it's easy to get, a certain demographic interested in silent film. The younger demographic though, that silent film is totally new to, sometimes it's hard to get them interested, but the music that is played has been incredibly effective at introducing different age groups to silent film. There's a copy of Nosferatu out that is done to Rob Zombie music. I'm not a Rob Zombie fan, but I love that version of Nosferatu because that music totally works with that film. And so, and that's something that we want to be able to kind of try with Flying Ace, is to be able to release it to very different styles of music and see how well it works in attracting, totally different demographic. Because the guy that loves jazz music is probably not going to listen to bluegrass banjo, but either one of those could work for this film. Bernie, you want to talk a minute about just kind of your approach and?
Well, Mindy, you want to talk? I'd like to introduce you to my wife. This is my wife, Mindy.
Hi, everybody.
Come up over here. 3 years ago this week, we celebrated our 3rd partner anniversary with a company called Twitch.tv, and my name in the industry is Pianoimproman. So if you want to see us live, we would love to meet you. And how many people this camera set up over here, this was an experiment. I don't know what, I'm busy here improvising. This was total improvisation. I did, what was it, about 4 years ago, I did this at Flagler College, and I saw Devin gave me the DVD to watch, and I saw it a few times, and I said, this time, I don't want to ask for it, let it just, because I've been doing so much improvisation because I perform almost every single day with very few breaks, right? So Mindy is the genius behind this business, because music is also a business, and I don't know what she does half the time. I do in a way, but
Okay, so
there's
stop
so much
talking
work.
and I'll
So
tell.
here's Mindy.
So basically what we do is Twitch TV is predominantly a gaming industry where people play video games, but they have many other channels and other entities that you can engage in as well, and musical performance is one of them. And what we do is we play for people. We're actually streaming this entire event. So from the time that the movie began, from the time that Devin started speaking up to now, we're recording the entire thing, and we have our regular viewers watching all over the world. We have people from every single country imaginable that comes on a regular basis, and what we do is people request songs. Everything from classical, Bernie's art, is everything from classical all the way through rap music. There's basically no music whatsoever that he cannot and doesn't play. All he has to do is hear a song for the very first time for maybe 10 seconds, and then he's able to recreate that piece in any style of music imaginable. So we have people that either subscribe to the station or they donate for a song request. And we don't only do music, it's not just he sings, he's also a singer. He plays 2 pianos simultaneously, but we have a live interaction chat with people where even though we've never physically seen these people, literally they're all in our living room. That's where our studio is. They're in our home with us. So every single day, usually Tuesdays through Saturdays, sometimes on Sundays as well, usually start at 3 p.m. We have people from all over the world requesting songs, interacting, chatting with us, talking. We talk about daily events, life events, situations that are going on in the world, political events we're supposed to stay away from, but Bernie can't help himself sometimes, so I try to keep him out of trouble. And this venue is going to be, for the next 30 days, available for you to rewatch, if you like, on twitch.tv/Pianoimproman. So if anybody has any questions about it, please come visit us and let us know that you came. Just send us a message in chat. We talk to people and they send us private messages as well. So if you say, I was from Norman Studios, I saw your show, we'd be more than happy to interact and have fun with you guys.
And if you say that, I'll take any request you like, and we would not charge you any kind of, am I right? Is that okay, Mindy?
Yeah, you already said it.
Well, you're special. You're all special because you're here today. And it's a very, very special new world for us to be able to be, I mean, we have people from Russia, the Netherlands, you name it. There's no country, Australia, we have a big Australian contingent. When was what do we have, about 4,500 people?
That
Last week at one time. And it varies, it goes up and down. And it's Twitch, twitch.tv/piano.
Do you have a card?
Well, I don't, you know what? No, we didn't.
We can't remember all that stuff.
Call Devin, she'll tell you.
Devin will let you know. And Twitch is also, forgive me for saying also, a subsidiary now of Amazon. Amazon's taken over everything. So.
By the way, he plays 2 pianos at once in these things.
Yeah, usually we have a Steinway grand. It's not a full-size grand. It's a beautiful Steinway, and I play this way, and then I have this keyboard to my right, so I'm doing this and getting all sorts of sounds. This is a synthesizer as well, saxophone and guitar and rock, and I just blow the minds out, you know? I love it.
You've mastered it.
Well, yeah. I also have my master's degree from the Juilliard School of Music. So I'm a classical pianist as well.
We thought that.
We're also going to be showing this on YouTube, and that'll be there for, forever. So if you check out on YouTube, Pianoimproman's channel, you'll be able to see this there as well.
Is it definitely coming through? Beautiful. So in that case, Devin, you'll bother Devin.
Bother me, yes.
Bother Devin.
NormanStudios.org is our website, and you can reach me directly at media@normanstudios.org. So, and and I'll
Then-
write down that piece for you.
Then you can watch the entire movie with my improvisations behind it. That's cool.
Okay, chat, we're gonna say thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back on Tuesday at 3.
Any other